Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, a distinguished gentleman who claims to be the overlord of this temple.
Tim Longo. I do not.
I mean, I'm cheating a little bit there and going into Eye of the Beholder 2, because today is Labor Day. And today I labored at Eye of the Beholder 2. So that was pretty much my day.
I mean, dungeon crawling is a it's a legit job.
It's
get in there and do your thing.
It's those
Hellbend needs you.
Those dungeons are not going to crawl themselves. And yeah, indeed,
Dark Moon Temple needs your help.
It needs my help. I mean, I played quite a bit on Saturday. I did a 50-mile ride on Saturday and played in the afternoon, and then I crashed early because I was tired. And then I played like a few mornings last week. So I'm think in the final area of that game. There have been numerous towers in this temple, and it's the geometry doesn't make a lot of sense to me. How these things all fit together. So there's some abstraction or hand waving that's going on there that I don't fully understand. And what the levels mean, like which are levels and which are like not levels. I feel like sometimes there's like levels where there's just like a staircase, walk down a hallway, turn a corner, go to another corner, and walk down another set of stairs. And it's like, does that count? Is that a level? Like, I don't know why that's there. Some of those things are very strange. It feels like it was meant to all fit together, but for no apparent purpose, which I think will turn into our takeaways at some point. But it has been really enjoyable to delve into, as it were. And, I went 5 levels down into the catacombs. I've gone some number of levels up into one tower. Now I'm in a different tower. I've killed 8 beholders. So
yeah, I mean that's the sequel. So
I'm assuming if I play the third one, it'll be like 64 beholders. Because it's you go from 1 to 8 to 64. You're just climbing up the polynomial curve there. But it has been. I think that the tactics I used to kill the beholders in the sequel would have worked in the original. So I feel like you could have, assuming you could hit him. Because I have characters with +3 and +4 weapon type stuff. So maybe there's a mechanical reason why you wouldn't be able to defeat him without using the trap. But assuming that you could hit him at all in the original, I feel like it would have been possible. It just would have been, it would have taken a while. These go down pretty quick though. They don't have. I looked up their hit points in 2nd edition, and they only have from 45 to 75.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is, well, one of the things later editions of D&D has done is really kind of striated the number of hit points things have. Like, they've really taken advantage of the full dice pool, and different types of creatures. You use different hit dice, like what they actually roll, like characters do. Like undead, maybe, or D10s or something like that. I don't remember because I just used the numbers, but things have different different hit dice values, and that kind of tends to straighten them out a little bit further. But then also you can advance the different monsters so that they're even higher level, and there's just a lot going on in 3rd edition. And then I feel like they wanted a greater distance between the sort of first level monster numbers, and later level monsters.
Yeah, right. You want to see those big numbers so you're scared.
Right. Yeah. So like but also to have the opportunity to do, 40, 50 points of damage yourself in a turn, right? Or in a round, right? So, I think that both the enemies, and the players do a lot more damage and take a lot more damage to kill. And it's really funny looking back at that and being like, well, when was I ever afraid of something with 45 hit points? Like, that doesn't seem like that many. And then you look at how punishing the system is, and you're like, oh yeah, that's why I was afraid. So it was interesting to kind of like compare stats for a beholder from 2nd, 3rd to 5th. I skipped fourth because I never played it and I don't care. But yeah, just looking at that progression today was kind of eye-opening, as it were. So.
Oh boy. Okay, there we go.
So.
Yeah, I'm still unconvinced that they would let you kill him in the first one, but it maybe it's possible. It just seems. I guess people would try. I mean, it's funny.
It's
I
a
mean,
better story the other way. I mean, it's feels
and
better.
it's puzzly, right? It feels
right.
like you're
and you got this special thing that you did the quest for, right? There's a lot of payoff reasons to do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was. Yeah. It's just it almost would be a letdown to kill. It feels like figuring out a way because it's almost like you're meeting a beholder in that one when you shouldn't be. It's like you're kind of out of your depth, and so you have the wand, you have the trap, et cetera, et cetera. So, feeling clever about it. But I mean, when I looked it up, I didn't find anything obvious. I didn't find any obvious videos where somebody had done it. So. But I'm sure they're out there. Do more research.
I mean, it's tedious to defeat them, honestly, in the sequel. It's in most cases. Like there are some cases where there are pinch points and they've been placed in such a way that the level design does a lot of work to make them really threatening. But in general, as long as you can find a space that's open that you can kind of dodge back and forth in, it becomes just a timing game. Just like, well, let me move here, do an attack. When it moves into position, then I'll move away. And there are multiple factors that play into that, including the use of the haste spell, which helps a lot. But fundamentally, it goes from the most terrifying thing in the game, where you open the door, you're like, oh my god, in the first game, to
yeah.
I mean, there was one point. To be fair, there was one point when I got to a level where I walked down this, there's this weird puzzle to even get kind of properly into the level, got into there and, went up to the first intersection. There's a door on my left with a button to open it, a door on my right with a button to open it. So I open the door to the left, I go in 2 steps and there's a beholder. And I'm like, oh man, that's rough. First one, I believe. And I mean, it just messes me up because,
you don't have the tactics yet.
I didn't have the tactics. I was in a hallway, so there's no place to move except back, and I was like, well, I'll go right at him. I'm hasted already. I often cast haste first thing when I rest because it lasts a long time, way more than than it would actually last in a game. So I raced up to it and it crushed my party really fast. So I was like, oh, okay, so they're still tough. So I did it again, and this time I was like, well, I'm not going to open that door. So I stepped past that and the other door, and 3 doors open and beholders come out. And I'm like, are you kidding me? But you can run past them. So I run past them, I turn a corner, and of course I'm mapping the whole time. I'm counting, and it's a long hall. It's like an 11-step hallway, and then you turn right, and it's several steps as well. You get all the way to the end of the hallway, but meanwhile they're firing death effects at me from behind. And finally, those catch up to me, even though I've run all the way down the hallway, because they kind of move at the same speed as the enemies. Because it's on this clock rate. It's like every 3 seconds, advance the world. And so I get creamed again. So then it's like, okay, well, now I know what the map looks like. So I do the thing again. I run all the way down. I turn. I go, and I'm like, but if they just keep chasing me, it's a nightmare.
They'll lose you though, won't they? I mean, their AI.
Well, they're a little better. They do chase you further in the later game, especially if there are no doors or anything. There's no doors in this level that I could hide behind, and clearly they knew it was too hard, because if you follow kind of after you make that turn, if you go more or less straight, there's an area with a sign on the wall that says this is a safe space, meditate, as much as you need.
Oh,
so they basically just give you a safe 4 squares where you can rest safely, and there's 2 of those in that area. So then it's just a matter of going out and kind of picking off the beholder, and racing up and hoping you don't get death spelled fast enough. But Yeah, so that's how I started killing more beholders. They do a lot. they clearly are enjoying themselves with the beholders in the sequel as well. There's several of them have they're kind of the old school beholders that have an eye, and then the mouth is kind of like directly under the eye, not facing down like it is, I think, in third edition, where it like, I feel like in third and later editions, the mouth actually faces the ground when it's floating. Right? It's just like the art is that it more faces down. Sometimes it's lower underneath the eye, and it's like an elongated. It's not just a globe.
No, that's a good question. No, yeah. I'm not picturing it.
Sometimes they have the mouth like right under the eye, and some, facing the direction the eye faces, and sometimes it's under the sort of body and faces down. And these are kind of more the where the mouth faces forward. So the thing comes at you, and some of them have like a bone in their mouth, like they've been eating.
Oh no!
They have and then you'll kill them and they'll drop a femur. So they're already having fun with like how nasty these things are. And then the creme de la creme was I went into this room, and you go into this room. One of the other things this game does well is that there are more sort of like encounters where you see people and they speak to you. I think you mentioned that last week.
Yeah.
One of them is a beholder.
Oh, cool.
He's gotten stuck in a hole.
Oh my gosh, are you serious?
It's very comical. His body is stuck there, and you can attack him or help him. And if you help him, he just comes and attacks you. If you attack him, you basically hit him and he goes through the hole, which is something you can levitate through some button on the wall type thing. But they show you this image of this beholder like looking down like Winnie the Pooh, stuck in this hole, looking down at you like, little help? Can I have some help here? A little help.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like they've definitely swung far away from the terror of Xanathar. And of course, none of these have names either. They're just kind of the big bad is a vampire instead. So it's been an interesting ride, a little campier.
Yeah. Is there anything to do with the beholders in this game, or are they just enemies? At a certain point, they're just enemies. So there's no like, there's no like Xanathar equivalent. It's just. No, they just took the namesake and kept going.
No, the equivalent is the vampire who's been taking over this temple. In fact, the higher level enemies are not even the beholders. Beyond the beholders, sort of as you progress, typically it's like you have one or two enemies that are kind of that level's enemies, and then you go lower and you get harder enemies and things like that. And here, the tougher enemy after the beholder are the bulettes and basilisks.
So you get petrified or petrified.
That's only happened once, and they give you some things to counteract that. If you don't have a cleric of high enough level, which I don't. Actually, I guess technically he can do raise dead or stone to flesh. So he could do either, but I usually have him on raise dead because that seems like the bigger problem. But yeah, it's only happened once of the couple dozen basilisks I've killed. So, and I've been looking around for a bullet proof vest. So,
okay, did you have that one primed up or?
That's from the dungeon run. So I just straight up stole that one.
Missed it then. Yeah, they probably heard that and then forgot it.
Yeah. Anyway. So yeah, it's.
Are you glad you're playing? I mean,
I've been having a blast, and a lot of it is some of the things I really, really like in this kind of era of D&D games, which we can kind of talk about in takeaways, and maybe that can be our segue. But yeah, I have been enjoying it. I mean, I poured, I don't know, probably 10 hours into the game today. I kept thinking I'd be done. Like I thought I was nearly done when I stopped playing yesterday, or Saturday, and then I sat down. I was like, okay, well, there can't be that much left. And I got up to the top level, and it was like, oh no, you just found this thing, this artifact that lets you get through this door that you couldn't figure out before. And now you know how to get through that door and go to a whole nother set of levels. So it's kind of funny that way. They do a lot of like showing you something like, hey, here's a puzzle, figure this out. And it's like, well, I don't know, after a while you're just like, well, I don't know what to do about that. And you just keep going and see what else you can find.
Yeah. There's a little bit of that in the first one. And in the manual, they have kind of like a hints or strategies, not in the clue book, but just like how to play, like things to think about. And one of the hints is just keep going. If you're not sure what to do, just keep going.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I mean, I know what you mean by that, and that's generally kind of like a good rule for most games. But when you have given me no indication of any kind what I need to do,
yeah,
I can keep going, and then I eventually will stumble into things. But in the first one, especially, like you can just not. You can miss something.
Find the illusory door or illusory wall.
Yeah, I mean, you can really miss stuff that's pretty important.
Yeah, that's still true of the sequel. I mean, I'm just primed for it, right? So I'm like, whenever I'm on a floor and I feel like it feels like there should be more here, I'll just start bashing and walking through wall sections to find it. Like I've just been trained now to have that be one of my tools, right? And just kind of like also know that, okay, all walls are 5 feet thick, and like, so there's things like that where I'm just like, okay, well now I know how they constructed their thing. So I know how to like examine it, and even just look at my map and say, okay, there might be something here, there might be something there, which is something we even touched on about the lowest levels last week. But yeah, I mean, I find that the pleasures that the game gives are strong for me, and I'll talk about those in my takeaways as well. So,
and they're designing toward those tools, like they know what your tools are, so they're taking advantage of them, right? They're like, well, they know that there's going to be some hidden stuff, so we're going to lean into that more. I'm sure the third one goes even further.
Yeah, they don't overdo it, except in one section. There's one section where there's an illusory wall, and I tried to map this, and it feels like there are like 24, like every wall goes into another 5x5 room where one or more of the walls might be an illusion. So you're literally like, you step in, you're like, well, can I keep going in that direction? And so it's like a maze where you can't see where the openings are. It's like any wall could be an illusion.
Yeah.
And then eventually you find your way to a room. And I think what happens is when you press the button in that room, it changes where the walls are so that you can get to some other room.
That's just maddening. That's like...
And I think actually it was beyond that where the beholder stuck in the hole was, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like, it's critical path. And it's like they're deliberately like messing with you. They're like, you're just gonna like blunder around in here. Like at one point I was like, oh no, did I hit the arrow forward once or twice?
Yeah, right. And you're totally off. I felt to that point, and maybe this would be too powerful, but multiple times in the first game, I really wished there was a way I could get my coordinates, so I could kind of have an absolute.
Yeah, this is my position.
Yeah,
this is my grid position.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think it would, because of sometimes they do things like teleport and spin, and like the whole point is to disorient you. And
but I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah,
you're supposed to take the clues from the game of like, this is where I am.
Yeah,
I was facing west, now I'm facing east, and things like that.
Yeah. No, and I did that too. And there's in level 11, I don't know if you remember, but in level 11 on the first game, one of the wings has a teleportation section that's
puzzle. With like 7 of them in a row or whatever.
Yeah, and they're like rings, kind of like rings of a hallway that's in a ring, like a square rather.
Oh right.
And then there's literally invisible teleporters that are teleporting.
Oh yes, right? yes. Mm-hmm.
And there I started actually putting objects on the ground to track which ring I was in when I teleported. Right.
Yeah.
Because it was even confusing about knowing where the teleporters actually were in the square. hallway, circular. Yeah. Anyway, so it's like, yeah, I get it, but
I mean, that's when you don't have much.
Yeah, that's one of my takeaways.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to them. We keep like alluding to takeaways. So
okay.
Let's turn to our takeaways. End of a series. It was fun to talk a little bit about. I know there are frost giants in Eye of the Beholder too, so I'm still yet to run into them.
They're going to punch you in the face.
They're going to punch me in the face from kneeling, I guess. So that's coming. Looking forward to it.
Who convinced them to go into? I mean, it's the equivalent of us crawling into an air duct.
Yeah.
It's like, who convinced these giants to do this?
With your snake,
maybe dominated by the vampire.
You'd probably be like, "Yeah, I'll go into a duct." I know you.
Well, I would, but
most people would not. That's true. You'd be like, "Oh, do I get the goggles?" Anyway, let's turn to takeaways. You, sir, of course, this is at the end of a series. We like to talk about things we take away, or maybe sometimes negative ones. I suspect we'll have at least one of those here from the game we've been playing. So, what will inform your future work, my friend?
The first one, maybe I should change order because you're just talking about that. But yeah, I will. I'll change order. So, just as a segue from what we were just talking about. You mentioned it too. It's just using the tools and constraints that you have to create. I create interesting gameplay, but I guess I think the interesting could be swapped with various things. It could be interesting. It could be difficult. It could be surprising. Gameplay. But I think overall, this game was a really good example of, okay, it's a game of its era. It was trailblazing at the time, because there were not a lot of dungeon crawlers that were first person, this sort of literal, even though there were ones from before this that were dabbling in this space.
And it was sort of time,
real time, and it's sort of state of the art, if you will. Even though Wolfenstein and Doom are close behind them.
Yeah.
But I just, even as frustrated as we can get during the series, we gave plenty of examples where they have some simple concepts like illusory walls, like these buttons, like using enemy audio to give you a clue that there's something hidden nearby, because you're like, I hear somebody walking around there, but I cannot find them. There's got to be something, so. And then the teleporters and the spinners. And so, some simple concepts that once, in any, sorry, I keep saying, a lot, but in any, modular game development situation, it's good to have those sorts of components to give the team, because, when you code them once, or whatever, and then you can hopefully use them again. I don't know how it's done in this game. Maybe it's not so modular. Maybe it has to be all handcrafted. But you have a concept, and then you're teaching the player that, and then you repeat it and use it in interesting combinations once you have a sort of a hand of cards to pull from, or I would say hand in this case, but not maybe a deck. And so it's just nice to see how creative they were with those tools and constraints. And then, like you said, that transfers over to the player as well, where they also have tools about how to assess and deal with these obstacles. So it's, it's a good trip down memory lane of an era of development when that was a thing, and they're trying to figure all this out. And the variety they got from using their constraints and tools was quite impressive.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I will sort of add to it as a takeaway, because I think, that's a lot of what I had to say about it. But it's also more about, for me, adding what the specifics of their sort of their implementation can bring to the existing, world of D&D, right? So, I think we'll talk negatively about some adaptation aspects, in the future, but I think they not only did they sort of they're adapting this rule set and trying to make it fit, but they're also saying, but we're also not like on a pad of paper, graph paper, or vinyl graph or something, a vinyl graph sheet or something like that. We're literally like, okay, well, what can we do to do the sort of promise of automating a lot of that. But also what like factors does that give us? And you kind of mentioned some of them, like, okay, well, we have position. So we have sort of like a radius around us, that'll do some of the audio things. We can mess with your orientation because the walls look similar. It's going to be hard because we're limited in these ways. What can we can actually use that to create D&D like puzzles, D&D of the era like puzzles. Because we've talked about sort of the older modules and things like that. Definitely the sort of Gygax era, of the first, few editions, where it's like, well, what can we do that's in that flavor, but also takes the fact that we're giving you a first-person computer game where, we have these specific artistic, technical limitations, and getting a lot of mileage out of that, I thought. I think there are a lot of places where better cluing would be nice and things like that. But I also think that's also a restriction because every character matters, right? And they're trying to fit it in a tiny little box on the screen, which is another constraint. So there's just like, they have a lot of constraints and they're trying to just like squeeze what they can out of that, that are unique to that format. So I think that that's something you always have to consider. If you're designing for, a scientific calculator, right? You make different decisions than you are if you're doing for the PS5 or the Xbox, Series X or something. And I think that they really got quite a lot out of it in the first go. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think level 11 for me was, I like 12 as well for various other reasons, but I think 11 was the culmination of all of that for me.
Yeah,
because they were, it was such a holistic experience, and they used all those tools to sort of, it was a very onion, almost literally onion layer kind of level where you're kind of peeling back each portion of it and having it all interconnect and stuff.
Yeah, and I thought it really leaned on the things that they could do well. Even if we, even if some of them worked better than others. I know you didn't like the levers and things like that, and I mean that's just a thing that people do in games that lands or doesn't, and for you it never does, and for me it sometimes does, I'm definitely the sort of DM back in the day who would have had puzzles like that, and would have just, and at that point would have been less flexible about finding a solution. And these days I'd be like, oh yeah, huh? Well, we've been doing this for 15 minutes, I guess. Yeah, that's the solution right there. You did it. Let's move on. Right. Which is the thing you can do at the table that you can't do in the game. Anyway, let's hear your second takeaway.
Second one, I just am calling mapping matters, and it's a bit of a weird one because it's sort of a meta takeaway because it isn't something. I mean, I guess it still exists today in some cases, and we even talked about some examples with games that do not have automated map systems and what the advantages and disadvantages are of that. But I just forgot how much I like drawing maps, and sort of the taking that away. Whether we know in this case it probably was intentional because they just did not have the tech yet, or I don't know.
They probably had the tech, just not the real estate.
Yeah. There was a constraint there of some kind where they were like, well, we're not going to make a mapping system inside the game for you to map yourself, so you got to do it outside of the game, or what have you. But just the concept of just keeping track of the game, and it's a weird sort of hybrid situation because it is trying to simulate tabletop. And so you can see the lineage there fairly clearly, but because it's sort of a hybrid experience of that you have all this not only simulated D&D in these dungeons for you, but also like semi-real time, and then in combination with that, you have to map physically somehow outside of the game, and there's a joy for me in that. But it also, when you have done that, it was impressing upon me how much that decision impacts what kind of level design they're going to be able to do. Because, if the maps were more automated, they would have made different decisions. Things would have been probably even more difficult because you're not having to figure it out yourself, But because they know you're drawing out the maps on the side, that's causes them to use their tools from the previous takeaway in different ways because they're making that assumption, I guess, is how I'd put it. But also just the pure memory of and joy of doing that, of engaging in that process was something that we talk about it with all of the sanding off of edges of games these days, and how so much mapping these days is automated, whether it's minimap, macro map, fog of war, automated fog of war, or both, or all of the above. And I kind of miss that.
Not to mention automated pathing. Just go here for your next quest,
Yeah. I'm actually playing something on the side right now that's pretty nostalgic for me, and they added in a breadcrumb system that wasn't there before when you're trying to find something. And it's interesting what it does, because you just follow the breadcrumb. You don't actually try to learn the city you're in. You're just you're just following this yellow brick road, essentially. So
at which point the rest of the world kind of fades away.
Right,
because you're just looking at those dots on the ground. Like
you don't learn anything. Yeah, right? You don't learn where.
You have to.
You kind of don't learn where the locations are that you need. When in the old days, like, okay, I'm going to learn this city and I'm going to get to know it. It's like Dark Souls.
Jeez, here we go. You had to drop it in there. Well, I also had the joy of mapping, but I will try to add to it. I'll and your points, because one of the things I think it does for me playing this game, and now having delved into a second one pretty deep, is that it actually makes me feel more embodied in the first person experience, not less.
Oh yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I feel like I am the guy in the dungeon who has a piece of paper in his hand and is trying to keep track of where he is, because the place is confusing. Even though, like, I'm using an iPad, right? It's very not what that experience is. Mentally and abstractly, it feels that way to me, which is really funny because I'm drawing it top down and like you would though. And of course, part of that is because of my own history of having played, RPGs like this in the 80s, early 80s, and having drawn hand maps, to try to keep track of where you were as you went. As you had described with Temple of Elemental Evil, for example. So it actually, it makes me feel like, like an Indiana Jones type or something like that, where I've got some clues and I've like been keeping a drawing going as I go and trying to keep track. There's some regularity to the map and things like that, which kind of work against it. But in general, it actually helps me more than hinders me. In a way that I find surprising. And actually, like, I think of Far Cry 2 as being another game that does that, even though the map is in the world. Because I'm constantly having to stop and look down at it, it's like it's another mode, and it feels the same way here, even though the other mode isn't in the game proper. It still feels like the actual play experience that I'm having in the game is with this piece of paper I'm drawing on, even if it's, like I said, it's an iPad with a Apple Pencil or whatever. So there's a lot of pleasure to be had from that. And I can remember having discussions, with folks on like Starfighter about how we had lost that, like how fun that is in a game, and that had disappeared. And this was in the late 90s, so it wasn't like that far gone, but they had disappeared because map games were, games that had the map in them for you were like the next natural thing. It's kind of funny because when I think of D&D, like we talked about, the dream was, well, it's going to do all the rolling and the math for you. And then it's like, okay, and then what if it also did like all the mapping for you? And when the game did more and more of the stuff for you, it kind of became less and less, in some ways, of an experience for you. I sort of think might be the case. I'm kind of trying that out now as I'm saying it. But
yeah, well, even playing, as we play D&D now, even playing online, it's gone even further, right? Because you're not drawing out a space on a whiteboard or some sort of hex map or something on the table. it's all there. I mean, I guess we technically could draw it out as we go.
Oh, no way.
But it would take a lot longer.
Yeah, or it needs significant tooling, right? I mean, it's not really built. The tools that we use are not built for that. I'd kind of love it if they were. I mean, I have done, just like 4 or 5 years ago, I did some DMing for my son where, I had a vinyl playmat that I just dropped down and be like, okay, this is the room you came to. And somebody was keeping track of like how this all stitched together, and like had a notebook where they were trying to draw their own map, and he had a terrible sense of direction. So it was always very comic. Be like, okay, we're going to try to run back the other way. And they'd get to a T-junction. He'd be like, I think left. and it was like, well, and they'd be like, how do you not know, Tony? And I'd be like, any one of you could be doing this. He has a terrible sense of direction, but you're having him do it so you don't have to. And this is what you get. Anyway, I mean, I do think like the more, you take the friction out, we've talked about how, you've just mentioned how like the breadcrumb game becomes just about the breadcrumbs and stops being about the experience of what's around you. Map games, games with maps in them tend to become map games. Having the separation reminds me of why you either don't want to have a map in the game or you at all, and just like, just not have it, or have the player responsible for keeping the map if you're going to kind of lean into this sort of level of difficulty with the space. So I appreciate it.
It's also, I mean, it's sort of a be careful what you wish for situation, which is a segue to my last takeaway. But like you said, we were trailblazing. Everybody was trailblazing at this time and saying, wouldn't it be nice, like you just said, to automate, XYZ? And I guess it's the Jurassic Park quote or something. Yeah. We were so just worried about whether we could do it. It's not, we never thought about whether we should do it. And in a direct lineage, which we've talked about this before in this series, a direct lineage going to Ultima Underworld as an example, where like, well, we finally can automate the map and have it fog of war, and you can place stuff on it and all that stuff. But playing both these games now, there's definitely something missing in UO, even though I adore that game. So it's fascinating. Yeah.
Not UO.
Oh, did I say UO?
Online. Yeah.
UU.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that game does different things and has more depth of simulation and things like that it uses as like its thing that it's doing. Mm-hmm. And in some ways the puzzles can be better than these can. These feel like very simple tricks, like changing your orientation and
abstract, very abstract.
Teleporting you to another space, etc. Like, and abstract. Like this square room turned and a wall opened on the side, and that geometrically doesn't make any sense. Like, you're like, this makes no sense at all. Like I would have been, smashed into a corner at some point or something. So there's a lot of things where you kind of have to squint and be like, oh, I see what they're going for. And they don't really lean into making those things seldom. Like I think of later God of War games, like the one with the maze. There's one that has the huge, like Minotaur's maze, and it's not at all like a D&D maze. It's like this huge thing, and everything moves and grinds, and like, it's a real labyrinth, and it feels like it. And they couldn't achieve something like that here. So you have to allow for the abstraction and just kind of let it, let that work on you. And since they don't have the spectacle, they have to draw you in other ways that are, somewhat akin to the pen and paper experience, I think. I mean, I think it worked for me a lot. I mean, it's still working for me, clearly. So
yeah. Well, and it's simulating a certain kind of D&D as well.
Absolutely.
Especially at the time. And I mean, I think, doesn't Xanathar actually mention something? He said something like, did you enjoy all of my traps and puzzles? And, I was like, okay, yeah. So they kind of, they fictioned it away by having him say,
did you enjoy fighting my minions and stumbling through my traps?
Yeah, exactly. So
that was
all these abstract,
for remembering,
totally abstracted, ridiculous situations were just from the mind of a beholder. So I'm okay with it. Yeah.
Not in the eye of the beholder, but indeed in the eye of the beholder.
All
right, let's hit that final takeaway, because I have a feeling we're going to be in alignment on this one as well.
Yeah, I think we have all the same one. So yeah, it's a translation, right? It's translation of D&D into video game, into the video game world, and how they did that, and sort of we talked about it in one of the episodes a little more deeply, or maybe quite a bit more deeply, especially related to other D&D games, including Baldur's Gate that we played, and I would even say Baldur's Gate 3 as I'm playing right now. But it is a be careful what you wish for me, because there is that golden ring that, like, well, we should automate this stuff. Wouldn't it be cool? We can have it all be super cool and have the spectacle in whatever era you're talking about, have the spectacle be cool and representative and feel immersive. And like you said, feel like you're in the dungeon yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So let's translate the rules. But then the irony in this particular game is they only translated some things that applied and made sense for this game, which I guess is right in a way. That's probably what I would do. You want to pick your battles on that. But then also sometimes, like resting as an example we talked about, they translated that literally with the simulated math. And it's why? Why do it? Yeah. Like there's no, so and there's
I have had it come into play on occasion in the second game where people have died and I've wanted to rest so my cleric can get raised dead back. And then the characters have rested for so long that I can no longer raise the dead ones because I rested for too long.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what I mean.
Things like that have come into play, but like they'll prompt you if you're hungry. Like, oh, your people are starving. Do you want to keep napping? But they won't prompt you and say, oh, you won't be able to raise anybody after this point because they've been dead too long. Yeah. So it's like, how am I supposed to keep track of that? So it's a very... Yeah, or people are poisoned. They're going to die if you rest. And so they automate some things and not others. And in terms of notifying you, it's I
mean, it's a controversial statement, and I think I might have said it before when we did talk more deeply about this, but I don't think D&D is a good system to translate to computer games, to video games. It's just not necessary.
I'm not sure it's great for the VTT.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could go very deeply about. There's VTT, but I'm still not even sure. There's so much legacy because it is the greatest role-playing game of all time, whatever, and is the most played. They've felt obligated, sort of, right there. And I do think 5th edition is in my opinion the apex of the systems, and it is the best of the best so far. But there's still holdover. There's still holdover that comes from legacy, and it's very telling to me because I was telling Brett and pre-show I'm playing Baldur's Gate co-op with a group. I'm actually playing it three games at once. I'm playing it 3 different ways, but with one of those groups, they've never played D&D or have no idea what D&D is, and I'm kind of trying to explain it to them as we're playing it, rules included, and it's just so stark to me how absurd so much is, let alone just the rolls. It's like I'm rolling a die right now to figure out if I can talk to this person. Like, what's happening? Yeah. There's that, which we just take for granted. But then also all the subsystems and what's a reaction and what's a action, and wait, I can move, but I have to dash now if I want to move again. It just goes on and on and on. And we have accepted it. Like armor class. Like, okay, do I defend? No, it's just your armor class. Like, you can disengage, this goes like, wait, so what's armor class? So, this was the best one. I had this person ask me, so what is a saving throw? Can you explain that to me? And I was like, it's a defensive roll against something that's happening to you. And if you roll high, then you might take less damage or no damage, etc. It's like, why is it called a save? It's just so when you have to actually bring somebody new.
First edition, it probably saved your life, right? So as some of those legacy things, for sure. I mean, I'll add to this because this was also my takeaway, is that adaptation is hard, and I'll try to take this more positive spin on it. I think looking at games like this should have informed how they evolved D&D. And what I mean is,
well, fourth edition, that's what happened, I think.
Yeah, but they weren't trying to adapt games like these. They were trying to take WoW.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, literally somebody who went and simulated your game.
Oh, you're saying a D&D game from the past. Yeah,
exactly. So if you've built second edition, and like somebody makes a video game based on second edition, you should look at that video game and see what they did. Because I look at things like resting for, 50 hours or whatever, however long it takes to heal my whole party. And I say, that needs to be simplified. And it took them until 5th edition to do it. Yeah. Like, that is a thing that is patently ridiculous. Like, it is, the same thing with something like THAC0. Honestly, I can't honestly say that was ever good game design.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's a historic holdover from wargaming. I'm sure there are reasons. Like, I know that. But at the same time, you look at that, you think of the complexity, every different class, because I was looking at the table in the book today, because I was like trying to figure out when my characters might level up. Like, do I want to grind just a little? I don't want to grind a lot, but do I want to grind just a little? Like, if it were just like 5,000 XP, maybe I would grind. And so I looked at the tables, and in there they also had the THAC0 table, and I had forgotten that THAC0 changed. You had like a base THAC0 per class. Uh-huh. So like clerics had a 20 THAC0 until level 3, and then they started dropping, and like fighters started lower, and I looked at all that and I was like, this is insanity.
Yeah.
Like,
the funny thing is THAC0
bad game design.
THAC0 was supposed to be a simplification.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Like, it was even worse before. And I look at that and I'm like, how is this? Like, this was never good game design.
2-hit armor class 0, by the way, if anyone's wondering.
THAC 0. Yeah. Not THAC0, even though we say it that way. It is, it's bad. I mean, it's just bad, and it's bad all around, and it makes no sense whatsoever. And the thing is like, we were also excited about 3rd edition when it came out in 98 or something, 99. And, we were totally jazzed. We're like, oh my God, they've done all these like improvements, and like things made sense. Everything's just a D20 for the most part, except some of those crunchier things.
Little did we know.
Hit dice and whatever. Oh yeah, well, and then they're like, now what can we do? What other complications can we add? So I don't know. I mean, my ultimate takeaway is that the two things can inform one another, and I think that's something, honestly, if I were designing a pen and paper game, I would probably look and say, okay, if somebody were going to make a computer game out of this, what would translate badly, and what could they not capture? Mm-hmm. And I would lean into the things they couldn't capture and try to make everything as light as possible around it and just make it a different thing, and then leave it to others to come up with systems that made sense for a computer to crunch through and make percentages and things like that. And moving forward, as you and I were talking in pre-show, that's what I'll be doing with my next campaign is like, I'm just going to like, I'll have the framework there. We'll use the 5e kind of framework, mostly because of familiarity, something for me to fall back on if I need it, but it will be less of all of these things that we do with 1,000,000 dice and more about the things that we bring as humans, right? I mean, that's when you're humans playing with one another, let's emphasize the human, I think is kind of where I'm going towards, even though I love board games. Like, I love board games. I love, I love those kind of artificial structures, but fundamentally what they're there is to reinforce and enable the human connection. And one of the things that AD&D adaptations really inform me, and of course now 3.5 years into a 3E campaign, is like, wow, this really gets in the way of some of that stuff. and slows down things and makes a Shatner roll turn out really, really badly.
Oh my God! Don't bring that up, you jerk. That's an inside joke nobody will know about, but hurts to the core. Let's just say a Shatner roll.
Burns. You might say it burns.
Yeah. Shatner roll resulted in a death. Failed Shatner roll. I think we talked about it with Vampire the Masquerade, but a system that I think doesn't get enough credit for its. I'm going to use the word. Maybe it's too saying too much about it, but it's a very elegant system.
Okay, I thought you were going to use the B word, as you usually call it.
Which one?
Brilliant. You usually say.
Oh yeah.
No. B word now.
No, I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to go that far. I'll go the E word, elegant, because it uses 10-siders only. It's sort of how many 10-sided do you use in a given thing. So it's very video gamey in a way. I don't know if they were influenced by video games because I think it was early enough where they probably weren't, but maybe they were. But there's sort of an elegance to this, even though
they were more influenced by statistics. I mean, one of the things I don't like about the 20 is the huge variance in the roll result. Yeah. It's like, you're really good at this thing. Oh, you rolled a 1, you fail. It's like, you're really good at this. You rolled 20 D6s. Well, that's going to probably add up to 60 or more, right? Instead of 20.
Well, D10s, yeah.
They use 10s or whatever. But like, whenever you use more dice,
Cthulhu uses 6s.
Because Cthulhu is the one I'm thinking of then. But whenever you use more dice, like statistically speaking, you're more likely, because you have more of them, you're just going to get a higher number by baseline instead of having this wide swing, right, between.
Yeah. It's also easy. It's easier to understand, and it's very video gamey in a way because you have two skills that you're pitted against each other. Like, say you're doing a contested roll in World of Darkness, and I have 4 D10s and you have 5 D10s. Yeah. Because your skill is higher, and it's like video games. It's like I put an extra pip in that skill, so I get an extra die. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's very like scalable and linear. And then when that translated to Vampire the Masquerade, I felt like when we played that, there was enough of the role-playing game in the game. Of course, that system is also very RP heavy anyway. Yeah. So it's going to be more flexible, but they're a lot less kind of combat focused. But in Vampire the Masquerade, it translated well enough to where I felt like I had enough of the pen and paper, but it still felt like a video game. I didn't. Yeah. It felt like a fair balance, because I think with the World of Darkness system, is more able to be translated, but it also is less deep mechanically and systemically. And that's what you do get from D&D for like combat and stuff.
Yeah, there's not a billion tables and skills.
No, you just
each classes and
2 people are rolling a lot of dice, and whoever wins punches the other one. It's like kind of stuff. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, that's a good comparison. I hadn't thought to bring in some of the other RP adaptations we'd play. Well, I guess it's just that one. I can't think of another one we've played that's been. Other than MMO. Playing World of Warcraft, which is not generally approximating an RPG, but more from the computer lineage. I was thinking straight adaptations. Did we play anything else in that vein?
We must have, but I'm blanking.
I mean, we played Baldur's Gate, but I don't think we played other systems.
There aren't.
Well, there's like Mech Warrior, and we've never played that, or Mech Assault. Those are based on
like Warhammer. Played any Warhammer.
Morrowind is based on is based on D&D itself, but it's so hidden away. We played Fallout, which is sort of based on GURPS, I guess. So that's probably the other thing that's closest.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that was turn-based, so that changed. Yeah,
it changes a lot. Yeah. I guess, and the other thing I would say that this does, that I might not have done. I understand why they do it, and I think you kind of have to do it in 1991, is that because it's a party experience, that the fact that it's a party experience is completely lost. Like, you have no feel whatsoever about it being a party. There's some vague positioning stuff, people in the back can't hit something with a melee weapon, which makes not a lot of sense. obviously, because you can surround things. Honestly, the top-down tacticals did that better. So that is lost, and it's done much better by Baldur's Gate, which of course is isometric. So they're getting that kind of feel. But that's another thing that I thought that just like, okay, you've got this party, but it's one person who's just really pulling all the puppet strings and just figuring out what array of skills that they want. I get it. You probably need it because you want to have things that appeal to all those different character strengths or class strengths in the game to make it feel like D&D. It's tough to figure a way around that, but at the same time I was like, come on. Like I'm not a party. I'm one person who has 6 6 arms or something. I'm like a beholder myself, but with arms. There's probably a word for that. Am I Shiva? Maybe I'm Shiva.
The pseudo action orientedness of this game is weird too. It's a weird hybrid because of that. Because of the party, you're clicking on a bunch of boxes,
right,
to try to with different cooldowns. I mean, if you really were to boil that down, it is like an MMO in that case, right?
Or it's like Diablo was before he made it real time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Right.
I just mean MMOs are semi real time as well. They're simulating cooldowns in the background because they, at least the old ones, couldn't be real time combat. So you're just hitting the number keys in succession, just like you are here. So
you're watching the graphs.
You're just watching things fill up. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're misclicking and accidentally hitting the portrait and being, oh, no, I got to close the portrait so I can hit with the weapon.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Or swapping accidentally. I did all the time.
Accidentally hitting on names. Oh my God. Yeah. I finally figured out how to swap people, and it's because I hadn't accidentally done that.
Oh yeah. Right.
And I do it all the time now. I don't know why, but that's
I did too. I had a fighter in the back row.
Just plain usability is terrible in some of these older games where you're actually, you just want a bar of people's attacks across the top, and then a bar of their, I don't know, secondary or whatever. You want their left hand in a row, their right hand in a row, or something. I know you want something different than this, because the number of times you accidentally click at this resolution on the thing next to it, is large. Because of the action element. Anyway, it's a thing. Well, do you have any other honorary takeaways, or you want to stick with those?
No, those are one. I mean, I think we hit all the meaty ones.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, as we promised, it's time for a little mailbag. We'll try to catch up a little bit. I don't think there's tons of questions, so I think we might be able to actually catch up and read everything. Thanks for sending these along to devgameclub@gmail.com. Sir, take it away with the first one.
Okay. This goes back to maybe episode 1 of this series. Westwood Fantasy Games from Ashton Herman. Hello, Ashton. Good to hear from you. Hi, Tim. Hey, Tim and Brett. It's been a while since the last time I wrote in, since I haven't had firsthand experience with many of the games you've played recently, but that all changes now that you started Eye of the Beholder. Actually, I've never played this one either, but what I did play growing up were a ton of the other Westwood games, including the Legend of Carandia trilogy and the Lands of Lore trilogy, which started as spiritual successor of sort of Eye of the Beholder before leaning more heavily into first-person action. I often tell people Lands of Lore 3 is my favorite bad game because it had some really novel ideas, such as the ability to choose one. Sorry, if that was June. Sorry. Such as the ability to choose one of 4 unique familiars in the game, and a diegetic role-playing system whereby you built your own character class by enlisting in one or more guilds in the opening chapters. It's not especially well executed, but it's interesting and fun. And it hit me at just the right age to find it unique. So I'm curious if you guys have any favorite bad games, quote unquote bad games. Are there any critically panned or otherwise unsuccessful games you've played that you just can't help but love, warts and all? Thanks as always for all that you guys do, Ashton Herman.
I mean, I can think of one for you just immediately.
Oh yeah, I have a go-to here.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I'll think on it because even though I've read this email, I forgot what I had in mind. I'm sure I had something. Go ahead with yours. I know what it is.
Do you? I think you probably do.
I do.
Trespasser?
Yeah. Yes, it immediately came to mind.
Yeah.
I think you beat Trespasser with the butter knife.
Okay. Yeah.
You probably can.
You probably can beat Trespasser with like a stick or something.
Right.
Like something equivalent where you're like, I should be using guns against these dinosaurs, but I'm going to use a stick. That might be possible. Man, that game is just, what the heck? Now that I'm thinking about it, I've just like fallen down a rabbit hole in my mind of like thinking about how the dinosaurs attack you and the physics system, and oh man, we need to play that game at some point. There's so much to talk about there.
I know.
But yeah, it is a warts and all situation for sure, because it is, I think, sort of intellectual. Well, not intellectual. What's the right way to put it? Technically, it is a bad game. Like, it is a bad game, but it is also not a bad game. It's an important game.
Right.
And I think we don't realize sometimes that that's the case. And I think we talked about this with Clint when he was on as well. Yeah, but that's mine. But I bring it up all the time, so it's not a surprise. Did I stall long enough for you to think of
I'm not going to be able to come up with the title, because actually this is the problem, and this is what I will say about it. Most of the games I play, I think, are bad.
Oh, okay. Well,
because most games I play, I forget about as soon as I put them down. They make no lasting mark on me whatsoever. And I mean, all the time. I mean, that's why I don't care about lore, is because I've played so many games with so much stuff in them that I'm just like, I'm not going to remember any of this. I'm not going to care. I'm just doing this kind of immediate thing. And it's not all games by any means, but there are just a lot of games that I've played in my life where
mediocre.
They're just, I mean, and if they're mediocre,
Assassin's Creed.
Well, honestly, I remember the first one really well. I remember parts of the second trilogy really well. The third and fourth ones don't really register all that much. I mean, it was that, but in time of the American Revolution. It was that, but in Paris around the time of the French Revolution. It was that, but in Egypt. It was that, but in Greece. There's a lot of that kind of repetitiveness, and I might enjoy particular elements, remember different parts of the stories, and actually those games probably stick with me longer than they should. I can remember a fair amount of all the Assassin's Creeds, really. So that probably wouldn't be them, but we played Far Cry 2, and I played was it 3 and 5? That's where I am with those games. I guess I vaguely remember 5. I remember kind of the high spectacle moments, but that's because I was watching a movie in the high spectacle moments, right? It's not the game. I remember the high spectacle movie moment, in 5 and 3. Yeah, I guess I kind of remember the bad guy, kind of the beginning, and so there's a lot of games like that are just they're not much, they're just not a lot there. I don't mind playing those games. It's not like I sit down and play them I hate playing this. I enjoy them while I'm playing them, but I also am a lot of people will go to movies that they are well, I just turned my brain off and had a good time. I don't really do that at the movies. I don't do that with books, but I do that with games. So there are a lot of games that I've played in my life that if you ask me, I'd be like, yeah, I guess I remember playing that. And then I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about it. I mean, there's games, there have been games that we played for the podcast where I'm like, okay, I actually really remember the play of this, but I don't remember a lot of the stuff surrounding the play, or vice versa. So, and these are good games, in almost all cases that we played. So I think that's with me, the thing is that it's why, if I had to give up entertainment, like games are probably the first thing I'd let go of, because they leave less of a mark with me. I mean, it's just, they don't change me. Like, I can remember so many books I've read, over the last 10 years where I'm like, oh man, this part of that book really hit home. And I remember the voice, I read the title, I see the cover. I'm like, I can remember everything about that book. That's almost never the case with me with games. And you're different. Like, you remember things about games when we're talking, and I'm just like, how can you remember it be so bad in general? And yet, like, you remember like crazy amounts of detail about games. And, part of that is what you do for a living making games and what I do for a living making games. And like, I don't have to care about it.
You just see the matrix. You just see numbers going by on the screen. Zeros and ones, right?
I don't know. So, I mean, I could pick things. It's like, I played games like Darkstone or Neverwinter Nights, which, I thoroughly enjoyed while playing. They were bad.
Let me ask you this, though. I mean, I think I see where you're going, and I understand and agree with you that there's a sea of games in the middle.
Yeah.
Of the bell curve.
Right.
But I think what Ashton, can you think of one?
I think
what's that? Kingdom Hearts. That's it. That's your trespasser. That's your trespasser.
No,
and I know we're offending a lot of people.
It would probably be something like Twisted Metal Black. Like, but the reason why Twisted Metal Black I loved is because I played it like 10 times through co-op with Andrew.
But I mean, is there something like a trespasser? There's something at its nucleus that's like memorable and good, but it's overall bad. That's my takeaway from what Ashton's asking. Do you know what I mean? Like there's some revelation in there where you're like,
the thing is something like that. I've so much forgotten. Like I just won't hold on to it long enough, because I can remember, like I remember playing Warcraft. I guess it was 2. I can't remember if it was 1 or 2. I guess, it was 2. I remember first playing Warcraft 2 and being like, oh man, like, and Doom and Quake, like things I played, and Diablo, things I played back in those days, even Myst. Like I can remember, every moment of playing those games. But there is a sea of games, because I used to be like on top of every release, when I started working in the industry. Like I knew when everything was coming out, I was going to play it. And there are games I remember from that time, like, the Grim Fandangos and, what have you, that I really loved. But there's a sea of games around there that that are just have left nothing.
For sure.
And that's why I put them in that kind of category of like, those are the bad games I played. And I didn't, because for me, like what I do, it's rare that I would take something away from it that I'd be like, oh, that's something I should remember, because I'm an engineer, and it's like, well, it ran, it was performant, like, unless it did really something spectacular technically, even that I probably wouldn't pick up on, because I'm also a gameplay programmer primarily. So it's like, well, if the gameplay was bad, like, I don't know. It's just hard for me to say.
No, I get it. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Myst. I feel like Myst is a funny, kind of interesting example, because I don't think Myst is a very good game.
Actually, the Seventh Guest is probably one that I had a blast with, and remember everything about, but there's like nothing there.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like not even as interesting puzzles as a text adventure. Same era, uses effects.
But it was kind of a revelation for a lot of people, because
exactly.
That's a good example.
But I was like, oh yeah, you can, look, actors do a better job, even if they're bad actors, than our digital, creations. And I can remember seeing, I don't know, what was it, Next Gen, that magazine, they had like a Final Fantasy character on the cover, in maybe 2000 or so, that looked like a human being. I literally showed it to a non-gamer and said, oh, have you seen her in anything? And she said, gosh, yeah, I feel like I saw her in something. She looks familiar. Like literally that, it's like eventually that's going to catch up, and like they'll be quite good. But so I guess there was some promise in something like a Seventh Guest, but it's just like, there's nothing there. I mean, this is just, as a game, there's not a lot there. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to this one. I feel like I never came up with anything when I got the email, and that's why I put it out in my mind. So sorry, Ashton. Mm-hmm. Usually I have something. All right, here's one from Sam Thomas. The subject is the CRPG book, which is good that we let this go for several weeks because it refers to what I'll talk about here. Hey guys, I thought this would be of interest to my fellow listeners. The CRPG book, 2nd edition, is coming out August 14th, and it also has a free digital version, and he gives a link, which will be in the show notes. This is great timing with Eye of the Beholder series. I'm a little hesitant to tell everyone the book is coming out because I want to make sure I get a copy. First edition has been sold out for some time. Sam. So that's a public service announcement. I remember...
So what is it, like a history of CRPGs?
It's a history and like reviews or discusses a large number of... And this is a tome. This is like...
Oh, neat.
It is... I got the first edition out of the library, like through interlibrary loan, like some state library has it, thinking I'll breeze through this. And it was like 700 pages, and it was it was like 8.5 by 11 or something. It was like a big, big. I don't know. Maybe it's 9 by 12. I don't know what that size of book is, inch wise, but and it was completely dense, and it had tons of history in it. Commentary on individual games, lots of individual games.
I'm looking at a picture of the book. It's
Oof. I feel like it might have ended with Skyrim. At the time,
there's a section where somebody drew a map. It looks like it's for Bard's Tale. Yeah, a grid map.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's got just humongous amounts of. So I had that book out for like I could only get interlibrary loan books for like 3 weeks at the time. There were no renewals. And so I had it for 3 weeks, and I read like 20 pages because it was just immensely dense. But I did download it into my iPad and took a bit of a look at it over the first week of August. So thanks for sending that in, Sam. Others may get some enjoyment out of that.
It looks amazing.
Oh, it's hugely researched. It is not at all a minor undertaking. This is, it's a major book. Major book.
It'd be amazing to you'd never be able to do it, but Reed would probably try, but he'd try to play every game in the book and go through from
that's not a thing. That's not possible. I think is somewhat crowdsourced in that regard. Like, I don't think that the author has played everything. I feel like it is a book that has a number of contributors and then sort of one editorial voice is my recollection from the first one. That there is sort of a quote unquote single author, but it's not really possible to do all of this.
But it goes through by decade too, and it talks about the state of the game industry by those decades too.
Yeah.
So which is good.
I see. It is a free nonprofit project. So and they have they have an author, but it is like I said, it's really it's edited by collaboration of 167 volunteers, 8 years of work for this one that was finished in December of last year. So that's a whole thing.
And now I'm kind of interested to know the contributors. Then I wonder if it's like a bunch of press people, right? It's interesting.
Yeah, this one ends with Disco Elysium. That's the last one that they mention when they go through all the games. So it ends in 2019. But my recollection is it was that Skyrim might have been the last one in the first volume, but I'd have to I don't have it anymore. So clearly, but yeah, it's a massive book. It's 685 pages. Please, take your time getting through that one. The million games that are in it. Rogue is in here. I'm just jumping through Betrayal at Krondor. It's just everything. They've got pictures. They've got discussions. They've got all these games that I've heard of, and some that and I happened to stop on page 152 at Eye of the Beholder. So here it is. Yep. Wow, it's a whole thing. And then the next one is Cobra Mission: Panic in Cobra City. Clearly, it must be the next game we play. Anyway, thanks for that, Sam. Folks, you should check that out. It is available on the web. I will put the link in the show notes. Sir, hit the next one.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going. All right.
Yeah, we can do it. We're good.
Okay. SimCity 2000 from Andrew. Hello. Thanks for your series on SimCity 2000. I really enjoyed your thoughts on how the game infused political thoughts in its structure, which went completely over my head when I played it. Well, it did mine too when I originally played it, so you're not alone. When I first played SimCity 2000, I was 8 or 9 years old. I really struggled with it for two reasons. First, I only put power lines besides zoned areas because in the real world, power lines go on or beside the street and typically not through backyards. As well, I would only put one zoning square directly beside each road, since in suburban neighborhoods, each house needs to connect to a street. I'd rapidly grow bankrupt due to road maintenance costs. Yep, same. I still had fun imagining my city growing in the undeveloped zoned areas because the newspapers were telling me that I had people in my city living their lives. Eventually, I purchased a guide and learned how zones will develop up to 3 squares from roads and how you needed to make sure each zoned square was beside a power line to develop quickly to start getting that tax income. I'd love to hear about times you've played a game and completely misunderstood core mechanics based on your real-world expectations, perhaps in other Sims or in newer games where everything is so much more realistic. One more question on 1990s era game music. Hearing the music for older games like SimCity is weird because I played games in that era on a Mac. Most recordings online for 90s PC games seem to come from the DOS versions. Some games have similar but not exactly the same compositions on PC or console, but with different MIDI-style instruments, and some games have completely different music entirely. As hardware has improved, every game now has identical music on each platform. Did either of you have a preferred type of music hardware for early 90s gaming? A specific sound card, console, or MIDI keyboard? Do you think we've lost something by not having to adapt music to specific platforms anymore? Andrew. All good questions.
All good questions. I did not have a favorite at the time. I had an Apple II, and then I had a Mac SE80, and then I had I believe a 386 would have been the order in which I had things. Of the three of my earliest machines, the Mac honestly probably had the best audio. I mean, it's one of the things about it being sort of a bespoke, closed system, artfully created, machine. I feel like it actually had pretty decent audio and sort of charming audio in a way that PC never had. I mean, sort of like the difference between Windows and Mac OS is like one is very functional and always chasing the other, which has an elegance that the very workmanlike one will never attain.
Yeah. Aren't Macs known for software, for sound software and stuff too, like audio?
Well, certainly, so the earliest Apples, going back to I think the Apple One. Actually, the sort of pre-Apple, their prototype, I forget what that was called. They actually were able to generate audio with a radio if it was like next to the machine. Like, so they always thought about incorporating audio into their systems. And then the Apple had the ability it had an onboard speaker, so it was pretty limited. It's tiny little, like 1.5, 2-inch speaker on the chip in the motherboard. Like it was just part of the system, is my recollection. And so the quality was never very good, but they thought about that. They thought about what you could do with it as well. Yeah, they kind of, with the radio, it was like some kind of resonating frequency thing. I mean, you were playing a radio as if it were a radio, but of course, when you're playing with whatever, a 6 kilohertz, 8 kilohertz machine at the time, like you couldn't do very much. It's like, it's like a Game Boy, in terms of kind of quality you could get, but it was fairly capable. It was called, besides maybe just the Apple One. Maybe it's the Apple One I'm thinking of. Didn't even have a monitor, but you could do things with the radio. that was next to it, a speaker.
Is that anything like the Xbox One?
Yeah, it was almost exactly the Xbox One. It's fundamentally the same thing, except with a better operating system. Yep. Yeah. So I would say, like, there was a lot of charm to the Mac. The boot up sounds are cool, like way better than Windows machines of the era. So, I definitely could see the appreciation of that. I know a lot of people love their Amigas as well. I don't think anybody loved the early PCs from an audio perspective. I was
going to say, the only thing I remember was when I purchased. The thing about PCs for me was cards, right? Like adding cards, and VGA card was like a revelatory moment. I think I've talked about it on air before, but I remember buying my first Sound Blaster card and putting it in my PC, and that was also just like a cool, it's not really like my quote unquote, like he's asking, favorite sound, but the concept of upgrading and hearing things change so drastically and not appreciating what impact the audio would have when you have a better sound card back in the day, because sound cards were starting to become a thing. Now they're just so standard, like you said.
Yeah, and we do a lot more in software, and not specific cards. Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is I think that there's sort of a craftsman's respect for how people use particular hardware as well. Like, so, we talked about the audio in Mega Man. We certainly talked about it, talking about like SNES and NES titles, and what they're able to get out of those cards and how memorable those soundtracks can be despite the limitations of their hardware. And I do actually think that those early systems have a real warmth that I think the Apple II sort of also had, to like, how they generate their audio through like either square waves or saw waves, I think. And then not a lot of sampling. So you actually had to be really, really artful in how you constructed your melodies. The melodies had to be really, really strong. And then you were really, really limited. Actually, when we talked with Grant Kirkhope about, the stuff that was in 007 Goldeneye, there's a similar warmth still in the N64, even using very small samples and very limited MIDI, sets, because he didn't have the memory to spare, and then it's like just having nothing to work with. And those constraints, lending a charm to them that is really, I mean, I think there's a reason, I guess what I'm getting at is there's a reason why people do chiptune music still. And it's because there's something really warm and interesting about those analog systems. And the later you go, it just feels kind of like all the same, so something is lost, but it's not fidelity, it's just like, it's craft, I think. And the sort of level of strong melody within constraints that you really had to achieve in order to make something memorable. So what we recognize is the artistry of those performers and composers.
Yeah, a recent example for me is I'm still kind of slowly chipping away at my Metroid journey, but going from back to back from, for instance, 2 Game Boy games that were Metroid. Like, we played Prime, which we talked a lot about the score in that game being, good and kind of like a modern translation of what you through nostalgia you'd think of for Metroid, but on a grand scale. Then playing Fusion, which was a GBA game, and then going all the way back to Metroid 2, which I'm playing on the Switch, but is, Game Boy original, and playing that game and the music translation, to his point of like, there's a simplicity. Oh, and I played Metroid 1 as well from NES. So I've played all of those from a musical standpoint back to back, essentially. And the Game Boy one is just very like refreshing in a way because it is so boiled down. It still sounds like Metroid. They do some really wacky stuff with making it sound very sci-fi, warbly and all that kind of stuff. That's very signature for the series. but because it was on the Game Boy originally, and I don't think they would have modified it for the port, the emulation port. I'm sure it's pretty close to whatever it was originally, and it was just neat to kind of see the different versions of essentially the same theme, right? Same themes being played, and that was cool. And I ironically enjoy the Game Boy one the most of all of them.
Yeah.
Did you have any to his question about real world expectations translated to a game? He had two different questions in there.
Can you repeat that part of the question?
Yeah, he was talking about SimCity, where he had brought in his real world expectations that were incorrect, and the game actually had something else going on.
No, I can't think of a game where I had, like, I mean, I think making them, it would be, I'd have to really, really dig back in the past, and then I didn't play a lot of games that had real world analog.
Yeah, me too. I actually don't play real world based games very often, SimCity being maybe the exception, and even that I wasn't super hardcore in back in the day. But one example I thought of, which just probably jogged my memory because of Trespasser specifically, and I won't talk about Trespasser alone, but it is a good example. Physics in games is, I think, a great area for this topic, because that game boasted physics. There's a lot of game that boast, Half-Life maybe is another one, Half-Life 2 specifically, as far as like the physics are so real or whatever. But, almost never do my expectations of real life physics come to fruition in a video game. And I feel like, especially when there's physics puzzles and things, that sort of like stack the boxes on top of the boxes or whatever, which Trespasser has some humdingers, as my memory. There's always that weird balance of, you don't really want to make it real physics, but it's got to kind of feel like it. But then when you're trying to like do something with it in the game, and you're trying to bring your real world knowledge of how gravity works, but then this crate, is acting like a cardboard box. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're kind of bringing these. So it's just, physics has always been an interest, is a kind of a conundrum to me, because there's like, it always sounds like a good idea to translate physics to a game, but it still needs to be fun. So you're always going to be pitting people's real world expectations of how something falls out of the sky with what is fun. And I always found that fascinating.
That's a good one. The other one I can think of, and I haven't played a lot of, any individual game in this genre, but I was thinking of something like Roller Coaster Tycoon, where like the concerns of a park manager versus the experience of a person on the ground is quite different. And of course there's like, I was going to say stuff that's a little off the rails, which is maybe not the right, but there are things like, well, I've got to make sure there's bathrooms near here, and like that the ride's not too much because people will vomit everywhere, and like where there's the food, and like it sort of makes you see through the matrix a little bit of, of the construction of a place like that. And, not like a really top tier one, like a Disney World or something, but like, like your run of the mill, local, I don't know, Great Adventure or something like that, which is, those are good parks, but they're not Disney World. They've certainly gotten better too. I also think of like where I grew up, Canopy Lake Park, it's like, they didn't really think this out too much, and there's sort of like, well, we tried to centralize these things. We tried to make sure you'd walk by the games of chance, and things like that, or, throw the ring over the bottle. Like there's a sort of a main drag that you'll pass through to get to any other sort of particular attractions you might want to go to. So there's some sort of thinking about that. And that's sort of like, but that's not something I ever thought about when I was a kid going to those parks. I was running past all that stuff to get to the, the particular things I wanted to go to, the Turkish twist or, the tilt-a-whirl or whatever. So that's another game I can think of that sort of had real world sort of, but if you had to run a place like this, these would be what you would think about kind of problems, that I had never really thought about.
There's a reason Main Street USA is stores and restaurants.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the thing you pass through to get to the, I don't know, the monorail or to walk
you
somewhere.
You go in that way and you leave that way.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And it's the only way in.
That's true. Yeah, it's also true of my local Ren Fair. So you come in and like there's a bunch of shops right there and some food and like there's one tiny little theater. It's mostly for kids, So and then the other attractions are further in. So it's a long walk to the joust. Anyway, yeah. Let me take another one here. Let's try. We can do two more. We can do it. This is from Chris. Subject is Dungeon Master. Hello, I'm enjoying listening to your podcast while on vacation and just caught the Eye of the Beholder episode. I do hope that you get a chance to play at least some of Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master Encyclopedia, and he gives a link, lists some options. As a 12-year-old with an Atari ST, Dungeon Master was mind-blowing and remains one of my best gaming experiences. It broke a lot of new ground, and if you play it, I think it will be clear just how direct of an influence it had on later games. There are also some unique aspects that deserve their own discussion, like the magic system. And then he gives a video as well that I'll put a link in by another creator that sort of conveys some of the wonder. He says, "Thanks, Chris." So I'll put that in the show notes. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to make sure we read this. I replied to Chris privately. We tend not to choose games that aren't readily available for folks to play, even if you could sort of get freeware or there's some web browser emulated versions. I found one of those that I could check out. There's a virtual Amiga type website out there that you can use. So, there are options. It's just not what we tend to send people to. I think we've only ever done it once because Warcraft is abandonware. That's the only time we've ever done it, where we've done something where like, this is just not available. However, there are abandonware sites if you want to go find one, and install it.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. On one of the Populous games, I think we had to do something weird with. Or I did, at least.
Maybe you did. I had it, but I might have had it. I might have already had it, and like it was no longer available for you or something like that. But yeah.
Maybe actually it was actually a bug that I had. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, I mean, Dungeon Master, I'm not surprised to hear him say it. I know that it is more influential probably than even Eye of the Beholder, but it has been it's been a bit of a mythological game for me my whole life because when it was so popular, it wasn't available for any of the platforms I had. So I always would go to the software store and long for it because it was sitting right there, but I didn't have an Atari. It eventually did come to DOS, but much later, and I didn't have an Amiga, and there was no way I was going to get those systems. So I was always really jealous about anyone who was playing Dungeon Master because for me in my head, I definitely ballooned it up into being something probably way bigger, way more amazing than it actually is because it was just that, it was that game that got away that I'd never get to play. And so that's why Eye of the Beholder was kind of replacing it in that personal canon for me. So I've to this day I'm intrigued by what that game is. I will
tell you that I look at the CRPG History Abridged section in the CRPG book, and I see that there is a genre's evolution in 36 iconic games. So he lists just 36 games. You're going to play 36. That showcase the advances, trends, and changes over the last 40 years. Dungeon Master is on there, but Eye of the Beholder is not.
Yeah.
I will also note that both Fallout 3 and Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, both on that list.
Both of them?
Mm-hmm.
No.
As well as Elder Scrolls 3.
No.
Yep.
No, that's not. No.
And Elder Scrolls 1.
Nope.
Yep.
Of the 36, four of them
36
are Elder Scrolls games?
3 of them are Elder Scrolls, and 1 is Fallout.
Or Fallout, whatever. Same thing. Oh, mate. It's
just Oblivion with guns, and then Skyrim is just Oblivion with guns without guns.
Don't get me started.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not a thing. Yep. I'm not going to read that book now. I think.
Okay. Well, that's your loss.
Morrowind, and you're done. That's all you need. I think. Come on. All right.
Okay. How much?
So I'm going to soapbox on that one. Yeah.
All right, get the last email here from Mystery Dip before we break up here on air.
Turtles all the way down. What? Mystery Dip. Oh boy, mystery. What's going on here? Hey, Brett and Tim. I was reading an article the other day and came across this quote. We build our computers the way we build our cities, over time, without a plan, on top of ruins. Quote, end quote. It made me think of how this is true in gaming as well. We had a short discussion on the Discord about it. A few examples. The level editor for games using the Wolfenstein 3D engine was built on top of the Commander Keen level editor. Yes, lives, timers, the scores as a carryover from arcade games. Early first-person shooters being Doom clones, the entirety of Dwarf Fortress. Are there any examples from your own experiences that you'd be able to share? Tools, old design, decisions, code libraries, genre/sequels, tropes/expectations, etc. P.S. Do you think Metroid Prime would have been a better experience if they didn't need to put the morph ball in, as expected from all the 2D games? Regards, again, Mystery Dip. Thank you, Mystery.
Thanks, Mystery. Yeah, I wanted to interject that he sent a follow-up between these. This is like one email. There was a second email, and then the PPS was a third email. The second email was, you've basically covered a lot of this in your discussion this week on Eye of the Beholder, because we talked a lot about sort of, D&D and like building on D&D and how D&D, built on wargaming to some degree. We didn't go too deep into that, which I think we just kind of mentioned it. But and of course, wargaming goes back to like literal wars as well, right? So it's like, it just, as he says, turtles all the way down. So it does go quite a ways back. I mean, absolutely. Obviously, I was mentioning RPGs I've worked on. Those definitely built on the tools, and the engine and the history of quite a number of games at that studio at Bethesda. And you've worked on series, right? You've worked on famous series, and that's I don't know to what degree you were building on source and tools, but
Oh man.
More than fair to say, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I'm sorry to tease like this, but yeah, there's stories I could tell that I can't, that I don't think are fair to tell. But I mean, if you have a foundational element that is existing, there's value in that, and you don't throw that value away lightly. So you naturally often are going to build upon it, for better or for worse, and with it comes these legacy, both legacy advantages, but also legacy challenges, because it's hard to change at that point. Yeah, it's really quite, and I've actually done both with Halo. There was, a unique situation there, because that's proprietary tech that comes from Bungie, et cetera. But then with Tomb Raider, we did make the shift, right, from one to kind of into a new era with the reboot. And that was a big lift, right, to kind of throw away stuff and start over in some ways, changing the way that the characters would control, and all sorts of like kind of fundamentals that was like its own nightmare, So
shame you couldn't get that Galleon engine.
What's the Galleon engine?
Galleon? That's Toby Gard's game he made.
Oh yeah, right. Galleon. Yep.
That is a weird.
That's quite a pull. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. That was a weird game too. That actually is a bad game that I've pulled some interesting things from. That would not have thought of it until just now. Because again, totally
ahead of its time
in some ways.
In certain ways. Yeah. It reminded me of Redguard. Do you remember Redguard? Did you play that at all?
I never played Redguard.
Elder Scrolls. That's a fascinating game, by the way. Reed and I talk about it all the time.
Really?
It's a fascinating game.
That's that was Todd's first.
Was it? Oh, I think we talked about that before. Yeah. It's really interesting.
What was I going to say? I mean, certainly things are built on the ruins of other things all the time. I mean, certainly, our first game together, Starfighter, was built on top of thinking it was going to be this PC game, with this transition from space to planet, or, vice versa, and the flight model started as something way more complicated, but tried to retain some of the complications, like without being super hard to work with. All of that, like if I was starting from scratch, would have been totally different, and with some experience, certainly, because it was my first time out. So there's some things I didn't know how to do yet. Well, it could have been better. Plus, performance-wise, the performance of that came from, all the engineers being PC people. Where, we didn't give any, like, we were used to, like, it's no problem to do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And that
going from PC to PS2.
Yeah. not ideal. Yeah. So that's, that's another case, for sure. Yeah. No, I mean, everything I've probably worked on, has had something like that.
The irony is that it's a really good question. And I kind of now want to go to the Discord and find the thread. But I think everything. There's not a thing that, because games are so hard. I mean, I know I'm exaggerating. Not everything, because sometimes things are literally built from scratch completely. But games are so hard to make to begin with, and you're always looking for. I mean, there's just the whole business model side of it, right? The way that that you spend your money, etc. But you're always going to look for ways to get ahead, if you will, to get on screen and to get things moving. And if you have anything at your disposal that gives you a head start, most of the time you're going to use it. In almost every case, I think. So
yeah, I mean, code that has shipped has value. Right.
Yeah.
That is code that has passed TRC, right? That is passed technical requirements. It doesn't crash, that code, and yeah, I mean, maybe it does sometime crash or whatever, but it doesn't crash enough to make it fail cert. So there's a real, in the technical realm, there's real inertia to change systems significantly. There was definite pushback to making two big changes from Fallout 3 to Skyrim. Around the animation system and scripting system, neither of which could handle doing a bigger game. There were significant memory concerns with the animation system. There were significant authoring and bug creating concerns of the scripting system. And both of those were meant to address actual feedback from the team and things like that. This is really, really hard to work with. And it was an uphill climb to get those changed, A, and B, there were definitely costs to the team from both of those. I can't really go into any detail there either, but there were costs and they were significant. Some of them were hidden. I mean, there's always things where you're like, oh, if I'd known that, I would have approached this a little bit differently. There were things about, I'll say, the scripting system where, as a person who hadn't built a Bethesda game before, I came in late on Fallout 3, I didn't realize certain things about how those games were constructed, as that scripting system was built. Not by me, but I directed it. And I would have made different decisions. And there were some virtues to the other ones that were, the previous system that were clear, on building the new system. So, technically speaking, something that has already been through, the fires of shipping and supporting a game, like yours, is there's a lot of value there, and it definitely is a big investment to change it, and that's why a lot of these games are slow to change. I mean, I look at a Grand Theft Auto game. I remember playing Grand Theft Auto, I guess it was 4. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, this is Grand Theft Auto 3. I could feel the Grand Theft Auto 3 engine in it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even though the graphics were, drastically improved, everything looked a lot better. The way things behaved moving around in the streets and all the weird hiccups in I don't want to even say the physics, but just the weird, I mean, it's just you can feel the layer underneath of oh, this is grinding along on that old engine's, bones. You can feel it, and you can definitely feel that going from even Morrowind to Oblivion to Fallout 3 to to Fallout 3 without guns, to Fallout 3 without guns with guns, and Fallout 4. Like you can feel all of that, and it's good to be talking about this now because Starfield is out tomorrow. So we'll see how much it feels the same to me when I check that out.
One of the biggest debates about any evolution of anything while working on Halo is, to your point about Grand Theft Auto, is the feel, because Halo feels a very specific way, and once you start rewriting or redoing or delving into sort of the deeper aspects of the engine or the way that the game is built or what have you, it's like it's taken so long to get Halo to the place where it was and to feel the way that it does. You want to be really careful if you mess with that, you know, so you have to kind of migrate it forward in some way. Very, very challenging. And I know it sounds reductive to say, quote unquote, it's how it feels, but you play a Halo game, it's a Halo game, you know what I mean? And you don't want to mess with that if you can help it.
Yeah. Any given engine will have its own feel. Technically speaking, the Unreal Engine runs its gameplay logic in one thread and its rendering logic in another thread, more or less. It's nothing is ever that simple these days, but you can sort of think of that as a division that has been true forever of Unreal for a long, long time. It does mean that what you are seeing on screen might be one or two, or even extreme cases, 3 frames behind what the gameplay logic is doing. And so Unreal games feel a little bit heavier. They feel a little bit slower to react as a result. And you can feel this through, you can feel it playing like, I don't know, Gears of War or something like that. And I'm sure you'll be able to feel it, in any future Unreal Engine games. I mean, it's just a feature of the engine. And as a result, they're able to get kind of a lot of really forward-looking graphical effects because they don't have to tie those to your gameplay logic. But it does mean that, like, input might feel a little laggy. I don't know, I'm not a person who feels that very deeply, but it is definitely true. And it was true of Republic Commando. I mean, it's less true of Republic Commando because we were running at 30 and, it was always rendering at 30. And so, the limit, it was never lagging 2 frames behind. Almost never lagging 2 frames behind.
Yeah.
I was like, except in that one area I can remember. Oh God, I'm built upon the ruins of my past games. So any engine, this is true of any engine. Like, I mean, you can feel it playing like I've played however many Assassin's Creed games, as we've mentioned before, you can feel that too. You can definitely feel at times where they're like, oh, they changed a big thing here. Like you can feel the difference between Syndicate and Unity, that they made a big change, and it's there. You can feel it. And as a player, if you know the games well enough. So yeah. And in terms of Metroid, the game would have lost something if it had not had the morph ball.
Yeah, I think it's better with it. Yeah.
Yep.
I think they did a great translation of it, and I think it wouldn't have felt like, I don't think it would have been a better experience, and I also don't think it would have felt as Metroid-y.
Yeah, I mean, but I also, I remember, talking with our interviewee, was it Matthew? Jack Matthews, sorry. It's like Matthew, but it's not Matthew. Jack Matthews. About like, oh my God, we got to do that. And delivering, and like knowing that they had to deliver.
Oh, Mark HH came up, right?
For Mark K. Hutchinson to do that work, to make it work. I wouldn't give it up, but I can imagine a version where they don't achieve that pretty seamless transition, and the feel of all those areas where they try to, I don't know, lock the camera behind it, or or even try to do something sort of first person-y, and it just feeling bad. I can totally imagine that game. And then I would say, yes, they should have cut it. But I think they actually delivered on the promise. So I prefer that it is there, but and don't think it would have been a better game. But I can imagine the worst game. So, okay, we did it. We went almost 2 hours. So of course, we did it.
You asked for it, I guess.
Yeah, so
probably
keep sending us those emails at devgameclub@gmail.com, and you can have 2-hour follow-up mailbag episodes whenever you want them. Anyway, and also send us a review. We haven't had one in a while. I have some singer reviews. I didn't sing them this time because, we're almost at 2 hours.
That's why.
Yeah. My throat is sore. That long ride on Saturday. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter still for a little while, I guess, at devgameclub, though I tweet less and less frequently. You can also find Tim twitching occasionally. I think the last time was about 218 days ago at, what is that? Twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
Yes. Find us on our Discord. We can also find him there as Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end. I am there as Dev Game Club because I'm the producer, damn it. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friendly cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord with others, and our merch store are by Mark Garcia. Have fun rising through yet another tower this week, and good night.
Good night.